Hey, y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is Cover 3 College Football Summer School. We've done our research on the teams, and now we're bringing on the top team experts from the 24/7 Sports Network to help us fill in the blanks. Please follow us on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast. That's Cover 3 Podcast. And leave us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. All right, class is in session. Hey, guys, welcome back into another edition of the Bud Elliott Summer School College Football Series on the Cover 3 Podcast. And today, we're talking a little Arkansas, and I'm really pleased to be joined by Trey Biddy of HawgSports. Nobody covers Arkansas better than Trey Biddy, and look at that background, man. Just look at sharp. Welcome, buddy.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on.
No doubt about it. Last year, another really nice year for the Hogs, 9-4. Power ratings pretty much agreed with that. You know, almost all the metrics out there had them as a top 25 level football team. Sam Pittman in year 2. Continues to run the program, seems to have everything headed in the right direction. Recruiting is looking up. Kept the coordinators, which I know was something in the offseason that they were fighting to do, and managed to do that. Move to Arkansas has got to be pretty good right now, right?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think you're able to appreciate how things are right now, given what they were going through in recent history and stuff like that. So things seem to be shaping up pretty well. As you mentioned, both coordinators and special teams coordinator, all three of those guys back for their third year at Arkansas. So you got some continuity there. That's always important. And really, when I think you look at this team and what Pittman has built and put together, it's a big team. They got a lot of speed, and they got a lot of veterans back. 4 starters on the offensive line, not just returning starters, but guys who are entering their third year as starters, guys who are entering their 4th year as starters. So we got one spot to fill at that area. And of course, KJ Jefferson coming back is really big for this program. This is crazy. Kendall Browse has been an offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach for 7 years. This is the first time to have a returning starter back at quarterback.
Wow, I've never really thought about that. He's just always been so good with the new guy. Even going back to when he was at Baylor and they played UNC in that bowl game, they didn't have any quarterbacks. They just ran a receiver out there and ran for like 450 on the Tar Heels, if I recall. Last year, their efficiency numbers throwing the football were great, but they still seemed to prefer to run it a lot more, I assume, because they had KJ in the offensive line, could mash guys. How much of that do you think stays? And do you think, I'm not saying they need to open it up, I'm just kind of curious if you think they will open it up and chuck it around more, given that when they did throw it last year, the results were really good.
Yeah. Well, you lose Traylon Burks, obviously, who's one of the top wide receivers in the country, probably going to be a first-round draft pick this week. And so that's tough. You got to figure out a way to replace him. But getting KJ back, getting those offensive line back, I think you're probably going to see a guy that improves as a passer from year 1 to year 2, although he had really the second best efficiency rating in Arkansas history next to Brandon Allen. So when you put it in that perspective, he did a pretty good job throwing the ball. But yeah, I think if you look back at the history of Kendall Browse's offenses, like when they've been really, really good, they're always like, top 5, even number 1 year in rushing yards per game in the country, and still top 25 in passing. That's kind of seems to be the niche for Kendall Browse's offense. So I would expect them to still try to run the ball. When you look at who's coming back, you got Dominic Johnson back, who was probably their best running back by the end of last year. Led them in touchdowns, led him in yards per carry average. He's a bigger back. You also got Rocket Sanders, who's also a big back, who's got some speed. AJ Green's coming back. They like Rashad DeBinion out of the freshman class, who was an early enrollee. Plus, you got KJ back, who ran for over 600 yards. Probably the second best rushing quarterback Arkansas has ever had, next to Matt Jones, at least during that time period. So you get a lot back in that regard, plus that offensive line returning. And, Pittman prides himself on being blue collar. That's kind of the theme around Arkansas. And I always said, he had some players coming back, from the Chad Morris era. Everybody looked at it as this huge rebuild. The problem with Chad Morris era is they didn't fight. They didn't compete. We can talk about losing SEC games. Sure, that's difficult to do, beat an SEC team. But losing at home to Western Kentucky, losing at home to Colorado, losing on the road to Colorado State, losing at home to San Jose State, losing at home to North Texas, those things are inexcusable. And that goes back to the culture and the coaching, and that was the biggest thing. And the toughness. Toughness has been a word that Pittman has thrown around. He's not like a cliche guy, but that's been a big word that he's thrown around, is toughness, blue collar, wearing that chip on your shoulder. Those are the kinds of things that Arkansas football is about right now. They've really embraced it under him.
I think it's a great point, Trey, because I actually like some of Arkansas's evaluations under Chad
Mhm.
Morris as far as of recruits, but they certainly didn't
I agree with
translate
that.
to
Mhm.
wins when Morris was there. In addition to losing Burks, and obviously, I mean, he's a stud. Uh, two of the other top three receivers, based off total targets last year, also depart. They bring
Mhm.
in Hazelwood. What are sort of the early returns there with Hazelwood, and who else do you think will step up specifically at the receiver position?
Well, Hazelwood's had a green no contact jersey, so he's been he went down with a shoulder early in spring. So, but I do think that he's going to end up starting for him, probably also in the slot, just like Traylon Burks did last year. A little bit different type of receiver than Burks, but a guy that's really talented. We're seeing that early. Also, look for Keytron Jackson to possibly have a breakout year. He was the top rated recruit in the class of 2021. So look for him. Warren Thompson's a guy that has really big playability. And we saw him catch several deep balls last year, but I also remember the UAPB game where he dropped 3 easy passes in a row. So that's something that he's got to get better at, is catching the easy
Consistency,
pass.
man. Yeah.
Right. Not just when the athletic mindset kicks in and you go make a great play, the consistency of it. They've got some other guys on the team. Isaiah Satanga, I think, is a guy to watch, freshman who hasn't enrolled yet. He's a top rated recruit in this past class. And, Trey Knox at tight end. He's a guy that's a senior. He's 6'5", 240 right now, probably going to try to get up to about 250, a converted wide receiver, former 4-star recruit. A guy that's played a lot of ball for him. So I would watch for him also. And, Rocket Sanders is a converted wide receiver playing running back. And, he's another guy that could catch passes for him. So there's some options there, I think, at wide receiver. There's a few other freshmen that could help him, but I would probably look for Keytron Jackson, Jaden Hazelwood, and Warren Thompson to be the primary guys. But also a key guy to watch out for is Malik Hornsby. Malik Hornsby is the backup quarterback. He may be the fastest quarterback in the country. Like he's that fast. And they have got to figure out a way to get him on the field. The problem is Arkansas is thin at quarterback. They have KJ Jefferson, they have Malik Hornsby, Lucas Coley transferred midway through the spring. So they're down to 2 scholarship quarterbacks. Got a couple other guys, Cade Fortin and Cade Renfro, who's coming back from an ACL, probably won't be back till August, who are walk-ons, who are former scholarship players at other Power 5 schools, okay, who have transferred in. Renfro was here last year. So they're a little bit thin. So a lot of it depends how much they put Malik Hornsby at wide receiver. How good do they feel about Cade Fortin or Cade Renfro? Because as we've seen, KJ runs the ball, and he's had to come out of the game a few times. He had to come out of the Penn State game basically the whole second half. Malik Hornsby never threw a pass, just ran the ball the whole time, and I think showed a lot of people his speed. So we saw Malik a decent bit at quarterback, but you're putting him at a higher risk for injury, putting him at wide receiver. So how do you feel about the other quarterbacks is going to be a big question, because Hornsby is a guy that I could see catching possibly 20 passes next year, and not just short dump offs, but, beating people deep, because he is, I'm talking electric speed, and they've got to figure out a way to get it on the field.
That's there's so many fun pieces here. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Hornsby, as you mentioned, Knox. I saw Sanders a good bit down here in the state of Florida. I also saw Warren Thompson. That's why I agreed with you on the drops issue. Like, if he ever got that licked, he look out. But Sanders is a guy athletic enough and strong enough to heck play like nickel linebacker if you wanted him to as well at some programs. So I'm really excited. I feel like if you give Kendall Browse pieces, he's going to put up the points, and yet I feel like Arkansas is equally well coached on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
But to me, there's more questions here as far as guys who are gone on that side. If we can go there, in the front seven, the top 3 defensive linemen, not necessarily in terms of talent, but you may agree with talent, but certainly in terms of snap count, are all gone. And then the top 2 linebackers, I believe, by snap count, are also gone. That's quite a bit for a team that likes to play a lot of nickel and dime. What level of drop off, if there's going to be a drop off, are you assuming here?
Well, you make some good points. I think it's interesting when you look at those 3 defensive linemen that started. Arkansas runs a 3-2-6 for those who don't know. But you look at those defensive linemen, they all were added post-spring out of the transfer portal last year. All 3 of them. Two of the guys from Missouri, one of them kind of from Houston. I guess he transferred to Houston for a moment. And then John Ridgway, who came up from Division II, probably going to be drafted this weekend. So they're still in the market for defensive linemen. They'd like to add 2 more, actually. Now, Isaiah Nichols has played a lot of games for them. Torian Carter has played a lot of games for them. They got a young guy in Cam Ball who's coming up. They've got some quality depth at defensive end. They've got Landon Jackson, who they got out of the transfer portal from LSU, 6'7", 275 pounds. Jordan Dominic also coming out of the transfer portal from Georgia Tech, a really good player there. So those guys are going to help. Plus, they have Zach Williams back. They have Eric Gregory back, who started a lot of games for them. Jashad Stewart, Eric Thomas. So defensive end spot, I think, looks pretty good. They could use another massive. They get one big, massive guy inside. I really think this defense has a chance to be good, because while they did lose their 2 starters at linebacker, the guy that was named All SEC is Bumper Poole. They had a pretty steady rotation with those 3 guys. So Bumper Poole had 125 tackles and was all SEC last year. So he's back for his bonus senior season. They also got Drew Sanders out of the transfer portal, who, they have some ridiculous depth at linebacker at Alabama. He started a few games for him, got injured, lost his starting spot. They've got some freaks at his position.
Trey, are they going to use him?
Yeah.
Sorry, I had a kind of follow up on Sanders, if I can stop you there. Are they going to use him more in a traditional backer role, or do they want to use him more as an edge guy? Because I always thought if you could line him up and run him off the edge, just that speed and ability to bend, could be special as a pass rusher.
I think we're going to see both of that. I think, we've seen some stuff they did in the spring. Sam Pittman's gracious enough to open up spring football to us, when they're not preparing for an opponent. So he opens things up. So it's been fun to watch all these guys this spring. But Sanders, I think you'll see him sometimes lined up. If they'll use a 3rd linebacker. We saw that a little bit. But also primarily, I think you're going to see him as one of the 2 inside guys in the 3-2-6. I think that was one of the things that was intriguing about Arkansas for him to come. He is 6'5", so he's a taller guy, obviously, 235, 240 pounds or so. Moves really well, especially laterally. That was some of the things that stood out. So, you've got some help there. I also think Chris Ball, who's a redshirt freshman, can be a good help there. But you do lose some at linebacker. So there's a little bit of a concern there, a little bit of concern on the interior of the defensive line. Let's see what they do in the transfer portal. As I noted, they brought in all 3 starters last year out of the transfer portal post-spring. Now, the defensive secondary, I think, is in really good hands. They do lose Monteric Brown, who had 5 interceptions last year, was one of the top interception guys in the country. But they get Jalen Catalon back, who was injured really the second half of the season with a broken hand and a bad shoulder. Tried to fight through it for a little while. Had a really good start to the season, but this is a guy that did things in 2020 as a redshirt freshman that hadn't been done in the SEC since 2007, with at least 95 tackles, 3 interceptions. So he did, for a defensive back, he did some really impressive things as a freshman that year, and was a freshman All-American. I think that he has a really bright future. They got Latavius Brini out of the transfer portal, who started 12 games for Georgia last year at safety. He's going to play more of a safety type role versus nickelback. And they also got Dwight McGlothern out of LSU in the transfer portal, who
I like Dwight a lot, man. I've seen him a good bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's an instinctive dude, especially with as much zone as Arkansas plays. I feel like he used his length there, getting those passing lane, especially if you're – are they playing him at field or boundary? I don't know.
They don't flip. Yeah.
Okay, they don't.
Yeah.
I mean, you make him throw it over his head. He's got some nice length. He's a pretty smart kid too.
Yeah. And he likes to let people know about it too. That was one thing we saw. He was not shy about letting everybody know that he was at Arkansas when he was out on the field. But they did some good work in the transfer portal. I mean, you talk about Landon Jackson it was a big time recruit coming out of high school. I think number 102 player in the country, something like that. Drew Sanders was number 22 overall prospect in the country coming out of high school. Brini obviously was a re-ranked 4-star who started for Georgia, national champions for several games. And then Dwight McGlothern, I think he started 6 games as a redshirt freshman for LSU last year. So, and another former 4-star. So they lost some pieces, but they got some mature pieces to what is overall a very mature team. That is something that really stands out to this bunch to me is, not just getting your quarterback back, all those offensive linemen, but just the whole scope of the team is very veteran and returns a lot. Pittman's back for his 3rd year. All 3 coordinators are back for their 3rd year. It's a big team with a lot of speed. I have to say, like, when I first went out there, the first practice, I was like, wow, these guys have not missed a beat. When they, from watching them in Outback Bowl practices to where they started out spring ball, it was just like they'd never stopped practicing. And I think that harkens back to a lot of the leadership, veteran theme of the team.
I'm legitimately excited about our Arkansas this year. I guess the only real question I have is, they do play a
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't call it an extreme version of bend don't break, but they definitely are confident in their ability to get stops in the red zone. And it looks like one of their just, if you look at how they play so far under Pittman and his staff, like they do not want to allow explosive scores.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to be a real emphasis. If you're going to play that way, you do need to get those stops down in the red zone. So making sure you have the big bodies on the inside to actually get stops when it gets down to head banging time is it seems like the only real question that would cause them to backslide, right? Like I feel like everything else is poised to, and obviously Traylon's a huge loss, but they could be better than last year, maybe.
Yeah. I think there's a chance. I mean, in addition to what you said, which are all factual concerns, the schedule is the schedule. It's the SEC West, but in addition, you've got Cincinnati coming to town the first game. Obviously they've got some key player, they lost their quarterback and such, but and they are coming to Fayetteville, but that's a team that was in the college football playoff last year. A game that gets glossed over, and I know it's an FCS team that they were in the playoffs, but it's Missouri State, and the head coach of Missouri State is
Bobby Petrino.
His first trip back to Fayetteville. So there is something about that game. It's like all of them kind of have a theme. Hugh Freeze at Liberty coming back to Fayetteville. Liberty obviously has had a lot of success. They lose their quarterback too, but that's a program that's had a lot of success. BYU on the road right in the middle of the season during a tough stretch in the SEC. That's another tough one. So in addition to the regular gauntlet of the SEC. So it is a tough schedule, but I do think that Arkansas has a better team than all those teams that I mentioned. That doesn't always mean you win, but I think they've got a better team. And I look at, some turmoil at Auburn right now, LSU with so much starting over. I really think, and people may think I'm crazy, but I really could possibly see 9-10 regular season wins for this team. I really could. And I also think you get the benefit of you get the good home schedule this year. There's like a bad year and a good year because Arkansas has to use a home game for the Texas A&M game every other year. So this year it's an away game, so that benefits them too with getting more home games in Fayetteville.
I have a hard time getting to 10, but I can see.
I saw your 7. I saw your 7 pick.
Yeah. But I will say, like if they get D-line short up, I'm not rushing to the window to bet under 7.5 if the number came out 7.5. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they've got some good defensive interior guys, some guys that have played a lot of football, but they do need some help. Like if they could get another guy like a John Ridgway type who they got out of Division II last year, that's where, you look at this team right up the middle and it looks really strong. When you talk about the interior defensive linemen, linebackers, safeties and stuff, that looks really strong if they get another guy like that.
Awesome. Trey Biddy, HawgSports, really appreciate the time, man. Learned a whole lot and really enjoyed this.
Yeah, I did too. Thanks, bud.
All right, that's the bell. Cover 3 College Football Summer School is over for today, but don't worry. We'll be back soon with even more episodes filling you in on the top teams in college football. Please give us those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow us on YouTube and on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast, and we'll see y'all soon.